I'm making another album. And yesterday I did something which I feel terribly ashamed about. Not really, I don't feel ashamed, but basically I did something that I think will be helpful for you to hear about, because it is an example of something I talk about a lot in the creative process, and it's a mistake that we all make, and it explains a lot about why you, I, and everyone struggles to get to the finish line with music or anything else. So I'll tell you what happened first, and then I'll give you the explanation. So I was turbo cycling, just going quickly through each of the pieces on this album in order. So, 1 to 10. And I just, basically the process is that I listen to the track, the song. I then, so I direct listen to it, don't do anything, listen. Then once it's finished, I make a list of the problems that I can recall that need fixing. Don't worry about any I can't remember, just make a list of those problems. And then identify what problems that, if I had to finish this piece in 20 minutes, what would I do? What problems would I solve? So this is a way of prioritizing the problems and only really focusing on the big ones first. And you'll understand why that's important in a second, even though in this case, it didn't work for me because I basically made a choice, but it's really, really instructive about what's going on. So I made a list of these problems, and I can't remember what the highest priority problem was, but one of the problems I identified that I remembered was the piano performance. So this is a piano piece. So I was listening to a piano piece, and it's a very simple piano piece. It's just got an Alberti bass, that kind of thing, in the left hand. And the right hand is just a single note melody. And it's something I improvised a couple of years ago, actually, that just really fits at this point in the album. It's right bang slap in the middle. And I decided to bring it in to this album. And the problem was, this is what I wrote. It was the piano performance is a little cursory. So what I mean by cursory is it's a bit throwaway. It doesn't feel like it has enough gravitas to it, because obviously a few years ago I just played it and just came out. It was just a little ditty. Whereas now, where it kind of sits on the album, it's a fairly kind of important point. It's like it means something. But it wasn't a high priority problem for me to solve, because there were other things that I think were more important, but also I think it's good enough. It's absolutely good enough. Now, in order for me, so basically a solution to this problem would be for me to replay this piece. Thing is, I don't have the sheet music, and I can't remember what the notes are, but I do have the MIDI file. So I do actually have the notes in a MIDI file. So if I wanted to solve this problem, what I would have to do is import the MIDI file into Logic, because Logic has a score function, so you can make a score. And then I would have to laboriously go through that. I mean, this is the only way I know how to do it. There might be other ways of doing it, but anyway, this is how I know how to do it. I've done it a few times with other tracks on this album. So I'd have to laboriously go through and move the notes along the piano roll to actually make a score that I could read. Okay, so I knew I'd had to do that. As I said, I've already done it a few times with some of the other improvised things I've done. Now, you would have thought that I would avoid that kind of action, like just completely avoid it, as if it was just not to be touched, because it's just so laborious. But in this case, it was like I couldn't resist it. It was like I was being irresistibly drawn to this make a score that I can read action. It wasn't the I wasn't being drawn to the doing another performance of it. I was being drawn to the import it into Logic and spend an hour moving these notes around onto the grid so that I just have a piece of music to read. Why is this? Why was I irresistibly drawn to it? Why did I start doing it? And then why, when I was actually doing it, did I just feel such a feeling of relief and almost like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. While at the same time, in the back of my mind, my editor, what I call my connector, was saying, you don't need to be doing this. Why are you doing this, Mike? But I just kept on saying to myself, I don't care. I'm enjoying it. It doesn't matter how long. I'm actually really enjoying it. It's just such a relief. Why was I feeling this relief? And why was I doing it anyway? Even though I wasted and did actually waste an entire hour doing this in the end. The reason is for one simple word. Certainty. Moving, though, like I knew exactly what I needed to do to create this score. Okay. And yes, it was a laborious task, but it didn't take a lot of thought. It was just something where it's kind of, you're literally moving notes on a grid so that they all line up. So it's like very like, right, now they're lined up. And it was all like putting things in their place and making everything all neat and like so that I could read this score. Essentially just organizing all of these notes. This is an incredibly certainty creating thing to do. Yes, it's laborious. Yes, it's usually something that I would avoid like the plague. But in this case, I could not resist it. And while I was doing, I felt just, it was literally like relief. And the reason for this is that I am at the end of the making of this album. I've got a week, or if I'm giving myself a slightly less intense deadline, a couple of weeks, just probably in between, let's just say a week and a half to finish. And when you're finishing a piece of music, you are in a situation where there is a perfect storm of uncertainty going on in your poor brain. Because what's happening is, as you finish the music or whatever it is you're creating, there is only one thing that you are certain of, and that is that it will be judged. Okay, that you are going to put this thing out and other people are going to make a judgment about it. And why is this a perfect storm? Well, for one thing, the human mind hates uncertainty. It cannot stand it. It will look for certainty absolutely everywhere. Just go on any social media immediately, and within 2 seconds, you'll see people, like human beings doing all kinds of things simply because they want to feel certain, right? Believing all kinds of things because they want to feel certain. There's almost nothing more frightening to the human brain than saying, I don't know, which is why I say it so often, because I'm trying to get used to uncertainty, because the creative process is a process of moving into uncertainty. Okay, so number one, the human mind hates uncertainty, can't stand it. It's how we've managed to survive, and thrive and take over the whole planet, is because our brains have adapted just to avoid certainty and look for certainty wherever it can find it. So, but what is necessarily happening at the end of the creative process is that we are approaching an uncertainty about something of which is absolutely terrifying to the human mind, and that is social judgment. So we're uncertain of what the judgment will be, okay, but we are certain that it will happen, and that is horrible. That's like kryptonite for the human mind, because when we lived in small groups in tribes, this is according to people who know about these kinds of things. So I've been told when we lived in tribes, social judgment, like being negatively judged by our peers, essentially meant that if we were ejected from the tribe, it meant certain death. So there is a theory, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but it kind of makes logical sense. I don't know if it's true, but there's a theory. This is why public speaking, for instance, is regularly described by many, many people as being, above death in terms of the amount of fear it creates, right? It's because the possibility or negative social judgment feels like death. Okay? So, or it feels worse than death, maybe. Not that I know, I don't know what would, I don't know what death would feel like, but anyway, let's not go there. So let's just recap. We're in a situation where we are certain of one thing, that it will be judged, and we are uncertain about what that judgment will be. This is a very, very tricky situation for our minds to be in. And whenever our minds are in a situation where they are uncertain, whenever we are uncertain, our minds will grasp for anything that makes us feel certain. Which brings me back to making my piano score for that fateful hour. That, as I said, moving those notes onto that grid was like, oh, I've done that. Oh, I've done that. Oh, I've moved. Oh, now this piano score looks just like a piece of Mozart. It looks like something my piano teacher gave me when I was a 5-year-old. Oh, don't I feel better? It was something, a series of small steps that I could take that had an endpoint that were making me feel certain, which is why I felt this enormous sense of relief, and why I also couldn't resist, even though that voice in my head was going, this is a waste of time. Why are you doing it? Maybe I could have resisted it, but I didn't. I didn't resist this certainty creating action. I mean, it was like the amount of rationalizations that were coming through my head. Oh, but then you'll have the sheet music. Oh, but then maybe you could play this every day until you do a good version of it. You'll make all the difference, and at the same time, I kind of knew it was a waste of time. Because when so I got this piece of music, and I was like, oh, that looks really nice and neat, and so I feel like really accomplished. And then when I went to do the performance, I quickly realized, I was like, what am I doing? I mean, I did it, and I literally do not have the time to record another version of this performance enough or practice it enough to hit the deadline. It's like either do this, or if I do that, then I'm not going to be able to do a bunch of other stuff, other things on other tracks, which are way more important, right? I mean, even within this track, this was the third most important thing, okay? But because of this search for certainty at the end of the process, which is completely understandable, which is why I don't feel ashamed. I mean, if I was to feel ashamed, then I would be ashamed because I'm human. I mean, maybe I need to be, but I don't. I don't feel ashamed. I don't feel ashamed to be a human being with a brain, okay? But that is, even though I knew it was the wrong thing to do, I still did it. I still spent that valuable hour, which is gone forever, in doing something I really didn't need to do. So when it comes to what you're making, when it comes to what you're finishing, please, 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 whatever you do, recognize that when you're finishing things, there is a difference between doing something because it feels good, because it makes you feel certain, and doing something because it's something that needs to be done. You see, the other things that I avoided doing on that list were things that I weren't sure how to, like the problems were things that I weren't sure how to solve. That doesn't make them less important though. Right? In fact, in some ways, it makes them more important. So what I did was I wasted time doing something that was less important simply because it made me feel more certain. So when you're making music, how many of those things are you doing, particularly at the end of the process? I'll bet there's a lot. So what you want to take from this is when you are finishing anything, when you're finishing a piece of music, beware that feeling, that thing that you're looking for, beware chasing certainty.